Welcome to the Bad Take, where two guys talk about random crap.
I'm Thamara.
My name is Himal.
And Himal, since this is our first episode, I think we should tell the two people who are listening why we started this and how it came to be.
Right. So, about a month or two ago, I was tweeting something, I forget what, and Thamara replied saying, "When do you start your own podcast?" And at the time, I didn't really give it much thought, but then we met at this event a few weeks ago, and then we had a discussion about podcasts in general, not this podcast specifically, and I don't know, it just kind of came to me one day that, he and I think along the same lines, and maybe we should sit down and have a chat, and yeah, here we are.
Yeah, and we've known each other for quite some time over the internet, not specifically in person, but something that I knew was that we were both fans of podcasts and we consumed a lot of podcasts ourselves.
Right.
So that's why I think I implored you to start something of your own so that we will have something that's coming out from Sri Lanka.
Right.
And like you said, we just connected and we thought without delaying it further, we'll just go ahead and try our hand at this.
I mean, this is an experiment really at this stage. Neither of us has any prior experience. It could be horrible. It could be okay. Hopefully it'll be a bit better than okay, but let's see. If you're wondering why we call this the Bad Take, it's because we are just two regular dudes talking about things that interest us. Neither of us is an expert on any of these topics, I think, unless the episode happens to be about something that we take a personal interest in. And also, more importantly, I think we just basically want to absolve ourselves of any responsibility with regard to the content and its accuracy and all that. So yeah,
it's just two dudes talking about random crap. As we mentioned earlier, we talk about these topics on social media most of the time in the form of text, but we wanted to see how the medium of audio worked. Our interests converged and we are only experimenting. So let's see how this goes.
In our inaugural episode, we are going to discuss censorship, a rather thorny topic in Sri Lanka and elsewhere these days. Thamara, do you want to define the word for us?
Yeah, so in a general sense, censorship means the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, I guess any kind of media or art that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security.
He totally read that off Google.
I mean, I'm pretty sure this is not an exhaustive set of restrictions that apply, but that's the general idea.
Yeah, okay. So we are going with the general idea. Here at the Bad Take, we are very general. We're all about the general. So censorship is nothing new to Sri Lanka. We know that quite a few works of art and publications have been banned over the past few decades.
Ashok Handagama's Akshara comes to mind.
Yes.
And then there was this movie called Flying Fish.
That was put on the Kalura by Prasanna Vitanage. I was a kid when it came out. I'm not sure if it was outright banned, but director Prasanna Vitanage had some trouble screening it. And the Da Vinci Code was banned, the film based on Dan Brown's highly controversial book. The call for the ban came from, while it did come from the Catholic community, it also came from a very unlikely source, the very pro-Sinhala Buddhist Jatika Helurumaya.
Yeah. And this issue of censorship does not only apply to works of art like books or movies. It applies to press freedom and journalism as well.
Right.
And while we can argue that the current government, for example, has been doing a better job than the previous one when it comes to press freedom, there have been other areas where they have not been so lenient.
Right. I think our opinion on this is that this government, because it has received so much criticism from traditionally Sinhala Buddhist voters saying that they are unpatriotic or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, this government is unpopular.
Yeah, it's very unpopular.
So they are trying to appeal to whatever voter groups they can.
Right.
To resume some sort of control.
So this government, in its attempts to appeal to the Sinhala Buddhist masses, appear to have lost sight of the larger democratic goals their campaign was initially founded on.
Yeah, I mean, this whole journey that started with the current president coming into power.
Right.
Some people called it the January 8th revolution.
Yeah, that's funny.
It has been going off the rails in funny ways, and now we have ended up here.
This government, for the most part, has been able to guarantee press freedom. I mean, people are not dying, people are not being abducted yet.
And we are not just talking out of our asses here. According to the World Press Freedom Index, Sri Lanka is currently ranked 131st.
Where were we before?
We were 165th in 2014 and 15.
Oh, a whopping 34 points. Wow. Okay. But
I mean,
you know what? It's something. Let's
yeah.
let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. Okay, great. So even though press freedom is higher than what it was a few years ago, this government has been trying to restrict free speech in other areas.
One of the examples that most other people will be aware of is the publication of this book, Budunge Rastyadu.
Yes. Full disclosure, neither of us has read the book.
Yeah. But from what we saw, it appeared that people who rallied against this were offended by the name itself, not necessarily the content of this book.
So they were basically having a knee-jerk reaction to the title.
Exactly. We could say the same about two radio dramas that came into the spotlight because of the same reason. One is called Nihon Sapalabewa. The other one is called Taruwan Saranai. This play Taruwan Saranai, they aim to mock this reality star culture that's prevalent in the country right now. They're not going out there seeking to offend Buddhism or Buddhist teachings.
So it has nothing to do with Buddhism.
Exactly.
It's just a play on the word Teruwan.
Teruwan Saranai. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's funny because that says something about the mindset of today's people as well. Most of us are just headline readers.
Right, right.
We don't
Guilty.
we don't really make an effort to find out what's really going on when these issues come up in society, on social media. We just share what we see, which is toxic behavior.
Right. But how much can we blame people for overreacting? I mean, it's the nature of the beast, right? Social media and today's clickbait journalism and media culture is designed like this, where people just kind of glance over the headline and either hit like or leave a comment. It just generally doesn't result in any constructive discourse. I guess, yeah, but that's another topic.
Yeah, that's a separate conversation to be had.
Yeah.
The state of social media and what it has done to media and our behavior. If we come back to the drama that has been happening in Sri Lanka, when these bans were implemented, there was a resistance from a group of actors and other artists and the publishers of this book, Budunge Rastyadu. They basically held a press conference and
they defended the right of the author in question and as well as the playwrights who were behind this play to express themselves.
Yeah, and one thing I found interesting in particular is how people reacted to Thumindu Dudantanna, who was a part of this group who held this press conference.
Thumindu Dudantanna, by the way, is the star of Kumbio for those of you who may not be in the know.
Yeah, and what I noticed was most people have got to know about Thumindu and his work through Kumbio and Kumbio alone, but he had done some pretty good work before that, and he was always a progressive thinker and he has been vocal about his stances.
So it really shouldn't have come as a surprise to these hordes of this angry mob basically that he would take this position on a matter that is and has always been particularly sensitive to him, because he has always been for freedom of expression as far as I know. Yeah,
and we should also mention that Thumindu said that he himself had his own criticisms about the content of this book, Budunge Rastyadu, and that he was only defending the writers and the publishers' right to put this out there.
And he had a rather long but very eloquent statement on this, defending author K.K. Srinath's right to publish his book. I don't know if Thumindu's statement, as positive and constructive as it was, resulted in what he had intended.
I don't think so either, because I had a look at the comments that we had received on that particular post and it was polarized, but it was the same mix, I think, as was the outcry initially on this Facebook group called Kumbigula, which people can go and look up if you want to get a taste of this.
Kumbigula is a fan group on Facebook for the Kumbio TV show.
I have to say that I agree with Thumindu's sentiments here, because as far as I know, there is no provision in the law that prohibits a publication like this. There is a part in the Constitution, I think in chapter 3, where they explain the fundamental rights and the restrictions that apply to it. And what it says is, while everyone has the freedom of expression which extends to publication, they cannot publish or talk about anything that intentionally harms the racial and religious harmony in the country. But that to me seems like a restriction against inter-religious conflict, which is not the case here.
But do we know how they would define such a thing?
No, to be honest, I don't know the black letter law which applies to this. So maybe someone who's listening can enlighten us.
Oh, and wasn't there another play that was banned due to, I think, some sexual themes it contained?
Yeah, this was a stage play called Mam Kelim Minihek. It's by this producer called Asanka Sayakara. And he has had a history of producing controversial works of art. I think one of his earlier plays was also discussed in the same vein because it contained some controversial topics. This play in particular had some sexual themes that some people were not comfortable with, and that was the reason behind the ban. But as far as I know, the ban was lifted and he's showing the play again.
When you say sexual themes, do you know if there were any explicit scenes in the play?
To be honest, no, I haven't seen the play, so I don't know what the content is like.
Because recently I checked out this play called The One Who Loves You So. It's also a sexually themed play on the LGBT community. That had some rather surprisingly explicit lovemaking scenes that I am very surprised got through the censor board at all. We're talking making out, simulated sex scenes, sodomy, you name it. Do we know what the process is for this sort of thing?
What usually happens is when you're producing a play, you're supposed to submit a script to the Public Performances Board, which is known as the censor board, and they will approve or disapprove of that. I'm surprised that, like you mentioned, the play The One Who Loves You So go through the censor board and not the other one.
When it comes to censorship, another area that gets frequently discussed is pornography. We know that quite a few popular streaming sites have been banned in Sri Lanka. They were banned a few years ago. I don't know if the ban has been lifted now. I wouldn't know because I'm not in the habit of consuming such content, of course. But Thamara, would you be able to enlighten us on this?
So, even I heard this from a friend. You still can freely access those if you just change the DNS on your server.
All right. I don't have any tech-savvy friends who could do that. Not for me. I was going to say for me, but yeah.
We should mention that sex has always been a taboo topic in Sri Lanka, largely due to the fact that we still have a lot of Victorian components remaining in our culture that we haven't been able to shake off, unfortunately.
Culturally, I think a lot of our so-called Sinhala Buddhist values are Victorian in origin, and like Thamara said, 200 years, something years later, we still haven't been able to shake them off, and that's unfortunate because a lot of our laws are formulated taking these values into consideration. Just the other day, India made a very progressive move. Its Supreme Court, in a historic verdict, partially, I think, not fully, struck down the archaic section 377 of their penal code, which had criminalized not homosexuality per se, but I think sodomy, which effectively criminalized homosexuality. I don't know how soon we in Sri Lanka can have that kind of conversation because, like Thamara said, we are still hung up over these archaic values that the Brits kind of left in us, but that's a whole other topic.
We talked a fair bit about the local picture, but we should mention that censorship is a topic that's very relevant and being openly discussed in many other countries as well as communities far beyond the scope of any government, like Twitter, for example.
Recently, Alex Jones, the founder editor of Infowars, which is in the business of peddling conspiracy theories, got banned by Facebook and several other websites. Oh, Twitter bans?
15 hours ago.
So we were just like in the process of Googling Alex Jones to see which platforms had banned him. Turns out Twitter had banned him 15 hours ago.
So what we found interesting earlier was that Twitter had taken this decision not to ban Alex Jones despite the huge outcry from progressive groups on Twitter. And Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey made a statement justifying why they didn't ban him. And he said, and I quote, "We didn't suspend Alex Jones or Infowars yesterday. We know that's hard for many, but the reason is simple. He hasn't violated our rules. We'll enforce if he does, and we'll continue to promote a healthy conversational environment by ensuring tweets aren't artificially amplified."
So this was tweeted on 8th August. There was some controversy surrounding his tweet, but turns out Twitter has changed its mind. Alex Jones or Infowars had posted a video violating Twitter's abusive behavior policy. So he was banned on the grounds that he violated Twitter's own rules, which was the same reason he was banned on Facebook.
I guess what's of interest to us today is this is also a form of censorship because now a user on Twitter is not allowed to use the platform anymore.
But is it really censorship? A lot of people argue that censorship is something only a government can do. When the state oppresses or gets in the way of your right to speak or to express yourself, that is censorship. But when a private entity, for example, if I have an establishment, if I'm running a coffee shop and you come into my coffee shop and start bad-mouthing other groups of people, basically saying racist shit, do I not retain the right to kick you out? If I did, would that be censorship? If I told you to shut up, would that be censorship?
So I would say that you can argue it's not, but here we are not talking about a coffee shop or one single establishment. Yes, Twitter is a private company,
Publicly owned, but
but the platform they've provided is as big as any government and contains multitudes of people from different backgrounds. So I guess the same code that a coffee shop owner goes by does not necessarily have to be there in the case of Twitter.
I think there's an interesting conversation to be had there. While it is true that it's only a government can actively censor a person or a group of people, and while it's also true that platforms like Facebook and Twitter are essentially private entities, the fact remains that these social media giants have memberships that run out to the billions. 2 billion on Facebook, I think, now. Even though it may not be technically censorship, when Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey decide that you are no longer invited to their platform, does that not effectively shut you out from a very large group of people? And is that not effectively censorship?
I would argue that a platform like Facebook or Twitter has more right than a government to silence voices if they decide to, because when you live in a country, when you live within a jurisdiction,
you have to play by their rules.
And why you have to do that is simply because you were born there and you are a citizen. There is no document that you sign or an agreement that you come to the government with. Whereas if you sign up for Facebook, you literally tick a box saying, I will abide by these rules. So I would say that such a platform reserves the right to kick users out if they want to.
You're referring to the terms and conditions that nobody ever reads, but one could argue that you have a similar contract with the society you live in also. Like if it's a country, you're bound by the country's law to behave a certain way. You can't be going around, for example, inciting violence. There's a reason hate speech is illegal in most societies. But then there's the question of how you define hate speech.
I think there's been a lot of discussion around this, because what seems like hate speech to me might not necessarily be hate speech to you. And if I am to look up just a general definition of hate speech, it says speech that is intended to insult, offend, or intimidate a person because of some trait such as race, religion, sexual orientation. But this does not say what counts as an insult or what counts as an offensive statement, because that, I think, is purely personal.
But yeah, you could say that because you're not a member of a marginalized group. If what you say is insensitive to me, I could point my finger at you and say, look, you're being a dick. But does that mean I have the right to get the state involved in banning you or stopping you from speaking to me like that? For example, if you're a poet or an artist or a writer, and your work, even though you may not intend for it to hurt or be insensitive in any way, I or somebody else finds offensive, does that mean I can make a case for your work to be suspended in any way?
I would say that the right is there, but then again we come to the same question of how we define this, and is it even possible to define, for example, what counts as an offensive statement against one of your inclinations?
Right.
It seems to be like an ongoing discussion where there's a lot of new developments happening every day. I think laws everywhere in the world have been slow to catch up on new platforms like social media. I actually don't think that we will ever be able to produce an all-encompassing definition of hate speech. To be honest, I'm really lost on where we should draw the line on free speech and hate speech.
What is your personal view on free speech? Are you for absolute freedom of speech?
I think I am, and I have been for the longest time. But what you said about me being not marginalized in any way, that point I fully agree with. I am mindful of the fact that my position on free speech comes from a position of privilege.
Right.
I belong to the ethnic majority in this country, and I don't think I ever have been marginalized or discriminated in any social situation that I've been in. If I were part of one of those communities, I think my position could have been different, but that's a lot of speculation. While I understand it's borderline selfish for me to say that I am for absolute free speech, I would like to maintain that position as long as I can.
Yeah, my position on this has also evolved over the years. There was a time not too long ago, in my ignorance, I guess, I was also for absolute freedom of speech. I would stand up for, I would disagree with you, but I would stand up for your right to speak your mind. My position on that has since evolved. I don't want to say changed. Having been exposed to the plight of certain marginalized communities, I think twice now before defending someone's right to be an asshole, either on the internet or in real life. I still have questions about where to draw the line. Say you're producing some academic work and that is insulting to a group of people. This is probably a very bad example, but if you take Charles Murray's bell curve, which has been at the receiving end of some serious contempt from fellow academics and scientists. Charles Murray has gone on record saying that he never intended to put out anything racist. He was just doing science basically, and those were the conclusions that he came to, as controversial as they proved to be. It's an ongoing conversation about deplatforming, isn't it? You have American universities, they would invite certain speakers and the student population would rise up against that decision, and there have been like borderline violent protests demanding the administrations to uninvite some of these speakers. When you look at the content of their body of work, for example, some of them, not all of them, I don't know how fair it is to label them racist or bigots in any way, simply because of the work they have done. I don't think the work was ever intended to be of a racist or bigoted nature. That, I think, is a serious conversation we should have. But I also agree that some people should not be allowed a platform. The government should never intervene. It's not up to the state, I think, to decide who gets to speak and who doesn't. But if platforms like Facebook or Twitter decide that a guy like Alex Jones, which is again an extreme example, let's go with Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson. I have serious reservations about Jordan Peterson, but if he has something to say, we are free to disagree with him, but I think we should hear him out. Thamara, you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I like the fact that you very subtly called me ignorant back there.
What? No, I didn't. I said I was ignorant.
You implied that.
What I meant was that I was ignorant of the plight of those people,
right.
Not that I was being a dumbass. I just didn't.
Right. No, but I have no problem with being ignorant. I actually like being ignorant. I don't like being stupid, because I think there's a difference.
Yeah.
Stupid means you're voluntarily oblivious to what's going on.
Right.
Ignorant just means you don't have the facts.
Exactly. There's no harm in being ignorant.
Exactly. Like you mentioned, all those speakers being uninvited to universities and their work being discussed as racist is something to talk about and think about. One of the recent phenomenon that we saw as a result of all this is the safe spaces that came out mostly in US universities. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I don't think I've ever had the need for a safe space, because like Thamara said, in a strictly Sri Lankan context, I also come from the majority community here, so that has never been an issue for me. But I understand why certain groups may need to rely on a physical space or even an intellectual space where they feel comfortable, where they don't feel threatened. But at the same time, there are questions about how far we can take that.
The problem that I have with something like safe spaces is I tend to think that people will not be able to grow a thick skin and face society when they just go out there if you don't face some kind of, not violence, but maybe at least verbal oppression. I'm not saying that we should go out offending people based on their inclinations, but these kind of things exist in the society, and if you are not exposed to those, then you'll be a snowflake.
Right. So what you're saying is that there will always be assholes, and we should basically grow a thick skin.
Yeah, and again, I understand that it's coming from a very personal space, because like I said, I am for free speech, because I think even the most hateful or condescending statements are just words.
Right.
And you should take them as words and not anything else. But
words can be harmful.
Yes. So I should also make the statement here that it's coming from my personal experience, because I know that if I heard something hurtful or hateful being said about me, I will not overreact to it. But I understand that people's boundaries are different.
Right.
People's thresholds are different.
Right.
So I'm not sure how we can pass out a law or just come to a general agreement on where these things should stop or start.
I think that's a great attitude to have. Like Thamara said, we all have our own different thresholds. What I may find offensive, he may not, and vice versa. If I want to say something to somebody and they react to it a certain way, that's on me. I am the one being a jerk there, and I should be mindful of that, and I should take responsibility for my own actions and my own words. And yes, words do carry weight. They can be hurtful. They can and do leave scars. All of this boils down to the question, should we tolerate the intolerant? What do you think?
I don't know if you remember, but there was this cartoonized version of this philosopher Karl Popper. His explanation of this, what he basically says is, as a society, we should not tolerate the intolerant, because when we do that, unlimited tolerance will somehow lead to the extinction of tolerance itself.
Right.
Because the people with intolerant ideas and attitudes will find their platform, propagate their ideology, and basically kick out the tolerating people.
Right.
I think you can draw an example from Nazi Germany here.
Right.
For anyone who's interested, you can look up this book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. This is where, as Karl Popper calls it, the paradox of tolerance comes from. From a personal perspective, I'm still divided on the topic. Like I said before, I don't know where to draw the lines.
Right.
But my mind is open if anyone wants to enlighten me.
Yeah, same here. My opinion on this is constantly evolving, and I don't have a strict position on this. I just think that, like Karl Popper said, if you continue to tolerate intolerant people, the intolerant among us will eventually emerge victorious, and they will basically hijack the platform, and pretty soon they will be the only ones with a real voice, and then us, the so-called defenders of free speech, will have enabled that. That will be in our conscience forever.
Yeah, so I think we should come to the conclusion that
Censorship is good. Yay.
I think this discussion is continuing every day. It's not something that we can put a stop to. So we should be mindful of what's happening, what other people are saying, what their sensibilities are.
But we should also figure out a better way to demarcate and define what exactly is an offensive and isn't, because that's a conversation I think we definitely should have. I think sometimes we get lost in this progressive jargon, and we may end up inadvertently silencing voices that may actually prove useful. The closest example I can think of is Sam Harris. Yeah, I started off as a fan. Thamara continues to be a fan. Sam's problem to me is that he continues to give these guys a platform, and I wonder sometimes if people like Sam Harris, and even me to an extent, if we are all on the wrong side of history here.
I agree, it's a very interesting discussion, because the way I see it, even Sam does not give a platform. Like, he basically says he does not like to give a platform to most of the extremists, but the ones he does give a platform to are basically the ones that he can have a discussion about, a decent discussion about, without going off the rails and ending up in fights. So our views on Sam Harris aside, like I mentioned before, it's an ongoing conversation. We definitely haven't done this justice. We would love to hear what you guys think about what we discussed. If you have any comments, suggestions, feedback, complaints, if you want us to just not do this again, please get in touch with us.
But please be nice. We haven't had a lot of time to prepare, and we clearly, as you guys can probably tell, we haven't done a lot of research either. We just sat down and recorded, basically. We met a couple of times before. We had a little chat about what we're going to talk about, and that was it, basically.
So you guys can reach out to me on Twitter at Master Thamara. Himal is on Twitter at HimalKK. Alright, so that concludes the first episode of The Bad Take. See you guys in the next one. Peace.